I was 8 years old when my father died, and I was already an orphan. Not legally, not on paper, but in the ways that matter, in the ways that a child knows when the person who looks at them doesn't see a daughter, but sees a bank account with pigtails. I knew it the first time Eleanor smiled at me. It was the same smile the real estate agent had used when she showed us the lake house, the same smile the jewelry appraiser had used when he looked at my mother's pearls. A smile that said, "This is valuable, and it will be mine. My name is Vivienne. I'm 35 years old. I'm a real estate attorney in Charleston, South Carolina, which means I spend my days reading documents that determine who owns what, who gets to keep the house, who gets to sell the memory. I have reconstructed 3 historic homes from their original blueprints. I have recovered 2 stolen properties from fraudulent trusts. I have learned that the law is not about justice. It's about paperwork. And I am very, very good at paperwork. This is not a story about a wicked stepmother. This is a story about a woman who used the word mother the way a thief uses a key, quietly, efficiently, and with the full force of the law behind her. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Vivienne, and this channel is where we tell the truth about the families who adopt you to inventory you. If this is your first time listening, hit that subscribe button. We post stories every week, real stories, hard stories, stories about women who stopped being grateful for their own robbery. Here's my story. I don't remember my mother dying. I was 6. I remember the hospital smell, the way my father's hands shook when he held my crayon drawings, the way the light changed in our house after the funeral, like someone had drawn the curtains and never opened them again. I remember Eleanor arriving 2 years later, at the club's Christmas party, in a red dress that was too bright for mourning, laughing at something my father said, touching his arm with a familiarity that made me hide behind the caterer's table. She was 28. My father was 53. She was a secretary at the country club, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's drink order and asked after their children with the precision of someone collecting information. I know that now. At 8, I thought she was kind. At 8, I thought she was saving us. Your father needs someone to look after him, she told me, kneeling in my bedroom the week before the wedding. She smelled like gardenias and something else, something sharp and chemical. And you need a mother. I know I'm not your real mother, sweetheart, but I can try. Can you let me try? I let her try. I let her brush my hair. I let her pack my lunches. I let her choose my dresses for school picture day. I let her adopt me on my 10th birthday in a courthouse downtown with a judge who smiled and said, "What a beautiful new family," and a photographer from the local paper who took a picture that ran on the front page. Local businessman and new wife give orphan daughter a fresh start. I still have that photograph. I keep it in my desk drawer in a file labeled Eleanor Evidence. I look at it sometimes at my own face, 10 years old, smiling, holding Eleanor's hand, and I think, you didn't know, you couldn't have known. But you should have. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday. By Friday, Eleanor had moved my mother's furniture into the attic. By the following month, she had replaced my mother's curtains, my mother's dishes, my mother's garden with her own preferences, modern, expensive, cold. She told me my mother's things were too painful for my father, that we needed to make new memories. I believed her. I was 10. I wanted new memories. I wanted a mother who didn't die. But my father was dying too, not physically, not yet, but emotionally. He had been a textile magnate, a man who built an empire from a single mill in Greenville, who spoke at chambers of commerce and sat on hospital boards and shook hands with governors. After my mother died, he stopped going to the office. After Eleanor arrived, he stopped leaving the house. He sat in his study, drinking bourbon, staring at photographs of my mother, while Eleanor managed the business and the household and poor Vivienne's education. I saw him less and less. Eleanor said he was resting. She said he was not well. She said I shouldn't bother him with my childish concerns. I learned to be quiet. I learned to be grateful. I learned to say thank you, Mama Eleanor, for every gift, every dress, every allowance that was smaller than the year before because, as Eleanor said, we need to be careful now, your father isn't working. I was 12 when they sold the house. Not the lake house that had gone first, quietly for taxes, but the house where I was born. The house with the swing my father built in the oak tree. The house with my mother's hydrangeas. I came home from school and the movers were already there, packing boxes I hadn't been told to pack. Surprise, Eleanor said, her arm around my shoulders, her nails digging into my collarbone. We're moving to something more modern, closer to the club. You'll love it, sweetheart. It has a pool. I didn't love it. It had a pool, yes, but it didn't have my mother's garden. It didn't have the oak tree. It didn't have the window seat where I used to read while my mother braided my hair. I cried that night, silently, into a pillow that smelled of Eleanor's gardenia perfume instead of my mother's lavender. Eleanor heard me. She came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. She didn't touch me. She just watched me cry, and when I was finished, she said, "Your mother is dead, Vivienne. I'm here. You need to decide if you're going to spend your life mourning someone who can't love you back, or loving someone who chose you. I chose her, or I tried. I wrote her letters, dear Mama Eleanor, thank you for the new school uniform. I love you. I drew her pictures. I made her breakfast on Mother's Day. I believed, with the desperate faith of a child who has lost one mother and fears losing another, that if I was good enough, grateful enough, small enough, she would love me. She never loved me. She loved what I represented. A key, a legal instrument, a way to access the trust fund my grandmother had established, the properties my father had accumulated, the inheritance that should have been mine. I found out at 21, not from Eleanor, from a bank. I was in college, the University of South Carolina, studying history, because Eleanor had said law is too hard for a girl with your temperament, and I had believed her. I went home for Thanksgiving to the modern house with the pool, and Eleanor was in Europe with her girlfriends, and my father was in his study, thinner than I remembered, his hands shaking as he poured his bourbon. "Dad," I said, "I need to ask about my trust fund for graduate school. I want to apply to law school and I need to know what's available." He looked at me with eyes that were foggy, distant, the eyes of a man who had been medicated into softness. "Trust fund, grandmother's, the one for my education. Eleanor said it was being managed for me until I turned 21. I'm 21 now." He set down his glass. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or guilt, or the ghost of the man he had been before my mother died. "Vivienne," he said, his voice was thick, "there is no trust fund. There hasn't been for years." Eleanor said it was for your own good, that you weren't ready, that you would waste it. I didn't understand. Not then. But the house, the lake house, Mother's jewelry, sold, he whispered, all sold, for the business, for taxes, for— I don't know, Vivienne, I don't know anymore. She handles everything. She has since. Since before what? But he didn't answer. He picked up his glass. He looked at the photograph of my mother on his desk, the one Eleanor hadn't removed, the one he had kept like a talisman, and he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I loved her. I loved you. I couldn't." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I understood. My father, the magnate, the man who built empires, had been reduced to a child in his own house. And Eleanor, Mama Eleanor, the woman who chose me, had been the one holding the scissors. I went to my room. I opened the drawer where I kept my childhood letters, the ones I had written to Eleanor, the ones that started, "Dear Mama Eleanor, I love you." I read them. I read them with the eyes of a 20-year-old woman instead of the eyes of a 10-year-old orphan, and I saw what I had been too young to see. The desperation in every line, the begging in every thank you, the way I had been performing gratitude for a woman who had been performing motherhood. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, the bedroom in the modern house with the pool, the bedroom that had never been mine, and I made a decision. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would not confront Eleanor and give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would become a lawyer. I would learn the language she had used against me, and I would speak it better than she did. I graduated from law school at 26. Not South Carolina. Eleanor had tried to block my application, had suggested I attend a local college, had withheld financial documents I needed for financial aid. I went to NYU instead. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in a dormitory closet for 6 months because I couldn't afford an apartment. I ate ramen and stole toilet paper from the library and borrowed textbooks from classmates because Eleanor, my legal mother, had given me exactly $3,400 when I turned 25, the remainder of what was left, and a note that said, "The education I gave you has no price. Be grateful." I was grateful. I was grateful for the hunger. I was grateful for the exhaustion. I was grateful for the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. I became a real estate attorney because I needed to understand how Eleanor had done it, how she had sold the house without my knowledge, how she had emptied the trust, how she had turned my father's business into her personal account while he sat in his study, drinking, dying. I learned about fraudulent conveyances. I learned about undue influence. I learned about the legal power of adoption, how a step-parent who adopts a child gains the right to manage that child's assets until they reach adulthood. How Eleanor, as my adoptive mother, had controlled every dollar, every property, every memory of my childhood until I turned 25. I learned that she had done it legally, or legally enough. The paperwork was correct. The signatures were hers as my guardian or my father's, obtained while he was sedated, depressed, dying. The court had approved every sale, every transfer, every investment that somehow ended in Eleanor's personal accounts. I couldn't sue her. I tried. 3 lawyers told me the same thing. The statute of limitations had expired on most of the transfers. My father was dead. He had died when I was 8, 2 years after the adoption, of an accidental overdose of the medications Eleanor administered. There was no evidence of foul play. There was no evidence of anything except a grieving widower who drank too much and took too many pills. Eleanor had covered every angle. She had spent 20 years building a fortress of paperwork around my stolen childhood, and I was on the outside, holding a law degree and $3,400, and a file of letters that started, "Dear Mama Eleanor, I love you." So I waited. Not because I was patient, because I was thorough, because I had learned that the law is not about speed. It's about precision. It's about finding the moment when the fortress has a door. I found it at a charity gala. Eleanor was 70. She had aged beautifully, the kind of beauty that money maintains, with dermatologists and personal trainers and a wardrobe of silk that draped her like armor. She was still active in charity work, still on the board of the hospital my father had helped build, still giving speeches about the importance of family and my journey as a mother. She didn't mention me, not publicly. I had become a ghost in her narrative, the adopted daughter who had become estranged, who had chosen her own path, who had never appreciated the opportunities I gave her. It was a good story. It made her the victim. It made me the ungrateful child. I attended the gala as a donor, anonymous. I sat at a table in the corner, in a dress that cost more than my first semester of law school, and I watched her. I watched her smile at the mayor. I watched her touch the arm of a state senator. I watched her accept an award, Mother of the Year, presented by the very foundation she had established in my mother's name, the one that raised money for orphan children that somehow never reached any orphan children. And I watched her forget the name of the award. "Thank you," she said, her smile faltering for just a second. "Thank you for this. This wonderful recognition as a mother." As a mother, too, she looked at the audience. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment they found me. She didn't recognize me. I had changed my hair, my posture, the way I held my wine glass like a weapon. But she looked through me with the blank confusion of someone who has forgotten why they entered a room. "To all children," she finished, and the audience applauded. And I knew Eleanor was losing her mind. I confirmed it over the following months. I contacted her housekeeper, a woman I had befriended years before, another of Eleanor's staff who had been underpaid and overworked and was happy to talk to someone who listened. I contacted her driver. I contacted the nurse who administered her medications. I learned that Eleanor had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia 6 months prior, that she had hidden it from her friends, her board positions, her third husband, a retired surgeon who was currently in Bali with a yoga instructor. I learned that Eleanor had no one. Her third husband had filed for divorce. Her friends had distanced themselves as her behavior became erratic. Her foundation was under investigation, not by me, but by the state attorney general, who had finally noticed that a charity raising millions for orphans had produced exactly 0 documented beneficiaries. She was alone. She was vulnerable. And she had no biological children, no other adopted children, no family of any kind except me, the daughter she had adopted to steal from, the daughter she had discarded when the stealing was done. I sat in my apartment, the apartment I had bought with the money from my first major case, a property recovery for a client who had been defrauded by her own son, and I looked at the law. I looked at South Carolina's adoption statutes. I looked at the provisions for adult adoption. I looked at the guardianship laws for incapacitated adults, and I found the door. In South Carolina, an adult can adopt another adult if the adoptee consents, and the court finds it in the best interest of both parties. There is no requirement that the adoptee be younger. There is no prohibition against adopting someone with dementia, provided they have legal representation and a guardian ad litem to ensure their interests are protected. Eleanor had no one to object. No family. No friends who would intervene. No husband who would fight. She was 70, demented, alone, and legally adoptable. I would adopt her. Not as revenge, I told myself. As care. As closure. as the legal equivalent of looking her in the eye and saying, "You took my childhood, I will take your ending." I filed the petition on a Monday. The hearing was brief. Eleanor's court-appointed attorney, a young man who had graduated law school 2 years prior and was clearly overwhelmed, argued that Eleanor lacked capacity to consent. I argued that Eleanor needed a guardian, that she had no family, that I was her only daughter, her legal child, the one she had raised and loved and who now wanted to care for her in her final years. I produced letters, the ones I had written at 10. "Dear Mama Eleanor, I love you." The ones she had kept, framed, displayed in her office at the foundation, proof of our bond, proof of her motherhood, proof that she had been a good mother to a grateful child. I produced photographs, the adoption day, the Christmas parties, the graduation she had attended briefly for the photo opportunity before leaving for Europe. I produced evidence of my legal career, my financial stability, my suitability to care for an elderly parent. The judge was a woman, middle-aged, tired. She had seen cases like this before: adult children abandoning parents, parents abandoning children, families torn apart by money and resentment. She looked at me and I saw something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or suspicion, or the understanding that the law is not always about justice, but about who tells the better story. "Miss Vance," she said, "your mother, your adoptive mother, has significant assets. A foundation, properties, accounts. If you adopt her, you will become her legal heir. You understand this creates a potential conflict of interest." "I understand," I said, "but I don't want her assets. I want to care for her. I want to give her what she gave me: a home, a family, a place to be remembered." The judge looked at Eleanor, who was sitting in a wheelchair at the defendant's table, her silk dress wrinkled, her hair unstyled, her eyes moving around the room without focusing on anything. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, "do you understand what is happening? Your daughter wants to adopt you, to become your legal mother. Do you consent?" Eleanor looked at me. For a moment her eyes cleared. For a moment I saw the woman she had been at 28, sharp, calculating, seeing everything. "Vivienne," she whispered. "My little Vivienne?" "Yes," I said, "it's me." She smiled. It was the same smile from the Christmas party, the same smile from the courthouse, the same smile that had said, "This is valuable, and it will be mine." But now it was confused, fragmented, the smile of a woman who had forgotten the punchline to her own joke. "You're a good girl," she said, "so grateful, so loving. You always were." "I still am," I said. "That's why I'm here." The judge signed the order. It was that simple. Eleanor Vance, 70 years old, former stepmother, former adoptive mother, former thief, became my legal daughter. I became her legal mother. The paperwork was filed, the records were sealed, and I took her home. I didn't take her to a nursing home. That would have been too easy, too expected, too much like the villain she had painted me to be. I took her to a house I had built, reconstructed, really, from the original blueprints of the house where I was born. I had found the blueprints in the county archives, buried in a file that Eleanor had forgotten to destroy. I had bought the land back, the land where the oak tree had been, where my mother's hydrangeas had grown, where my father had pushed me on a swing and laughed in a way I had almost forgotten. I had rebuilt it, room by room, window by window, using the money from my legal practice, from the properties I had recovered for clients, from the cases I had won by being more precise than the people who had taught me that precision was power. It was the same house, the same kitchen, the same window seat, the same bedroom where my mother had braided my hair, and now, Eleanor lived in my mother's room. She was confused most days. She didn't understand why the house looked familiar, why the garden made her anxious, why the woman who brought her medication and helped her dress looked at her with eyes that were neither loving nor hateful, just watching, always watching, like a scientist observing an experiment. Some days she remembered. She would look at me with sudden clarity and say, "You sold my house. You stole my money. You made me your mother." And I would say, "No, Eleanor, you sold my house. You stole my money, and I adopted you back. There's a difference." She would shake her head. She would cry. She would try to hit me, her thin arms flailing, and I would hold her wrists gently, the way she had held mine when I was 10 and she was telling me to be grateful, and I would say, "It's okay. You're safe, I'm here." Other days she was a child. She would ask for her own mother, dead for 50 years. She would ask for my father, dead for 27. She would ask for her husband, meaning the third one, the one in Bali, and I would say, "He's not here, Eleanor." "But I am." I fed her the food she had fed me. Canned soup, cheap bread. "We must be grateful," I would say, echoing her words from my childhood. "We must appreciate what we have." She would look at me with confusion, sometimes with fear, and she would eat. I dressed her in her own clothes, the silk dresses, the designer labels, the wardrobe she had bought with my inheritance. They didn't fit anymore. She had shrunk, or the clothes had grown, or time had altered both until she looked ridiculous, a child playing dress-up in her grandmother's closet. I didn't alter them. I let her wear them, wrinkled and stained, to breakfast, to the garden, to the doctor's appointments I scheduled and attended. And every night after dinner I read to her, not stories, not poetry, documents. The deed of sale, I would read, my voice steady, clinical, the voice I used in court. For the property at 142 Oak Lane, sold by Eleanor Vance, guardian of Vivienne Vance, minor, on March 14, 1999. Proceeds, $1.4 million. Deposited into account ending in 4472, held solely by Eleanor Vance. Stop, Eleanor would whisper, please, I don't remember. The trust transfer, I would continue. From the Margaret Vance Educational Trust, established 1987, transferred to Eleanor Vance, adoptive mother, on June 3, 2001. Amount, $890,000. Purpose, educational expenses for Vivienne Vance. Actual educational expenses, $12,400. Remainder, unaccounted. I loved you, Eleanor would say sometimes. I did. I was a mother to you. You were a key, I would say, a legal instrument, a way to access what wasn't yours. But you were not a mother. A mother doesn't inventory her child. I would close the file. I would help her to bed. I would tuck her in my mother's room with my mother's curtains, in the house that Eleanor had sold and I had rebuilt. And I would say, good night, Eleanor, sleep well. I'll read more tomorrow. She died 3 years later, not violently, not dramatically. Just quietly in her sleep in my mother's room, holding my hand because I had been sitting with her, because I always sat with her, because I had promised myself that I would not abandon her the way she had abandoned me, even though my presence was the thing she feared most. I didn't cry at the funeral. I paid for a modest casket. I buried her in the family cemetery next to my father, not as his wife but as my daughter. The headstone reads, Eleanor Vance, 19,542,027. Adoptive mother of Vivienne Vance, 19,892,026. Adoptive daughter of Vivienne Vance, 20,262,027. The dates are everything. The date of my adoption, when I became her legal property. The date of her adoption, when she became mine. The dash between them, 37 years of theft and performance, and the word mother used as a weapon. I buried her and I walked away and I did not look back. But I didn't stop there. The house, my mother's house, my house, Eleanor's final prison, became something else. I converted it into a residence. Not a nursing home, not a shelter, a place for women like me. Women who were adopted by families that saw them as assets. Women who were raised by stepparents who used legal language to hide theft. Women who were told to be grateful while their inheritances were sold, their trusts were emptied, their childhoods were mortgaged by people who called themselves mother or father and smiled while they signed the papers. I called it the Eleanor House, not ironically, not sarcastically, because Eleanor taught me something in her theft and her performance and her final confusion. She taught me that the law is a language and that language can be used to hurt or to heal. She taught me that adoption is a contract and that contracts can be rewritten. She taught me that the word mother is not sacred. It is a role, a choice, a responsibility that some people perform and others exploit. The women who come to the Eleanor House are lawyers, accountants, social workers, students. They stay for as long as they need, 6 months, a year, 2 years. They study, they recover documents. They learn the language of property law, of trust administration, of fraudulent conveyance. They learn to read the paperwork that was used against them and to write the paperwork that will be used for them. And when they leave, each one receives a letter. Not from me. From Eleanor. I copied her letters, the ones I wrote to her, the ones she kept, the ones that said, Dear Mama Eleanor, I love you. I give them to each resident with a note. This is what gratitude looks like when it's demanded. You don't owe anyone this. You owe yourself the truth. The plaque at the entrance says, No one adopts you to steal from you, but if they do, you can adopt them back. I'm Vivienne. I'm 38 years old. I'm sitting on the porch swing my father built. The one I found at an estate sale, the one I restored, the one that hangs from the oak tree I replanted in the exact spot where the original stood. A resident is sitting with me. She's 19, her name is Maria. Her foster parents stole her settlement from a car accident that killed her biological parents. She's been at the Eleanor House for 8 months. She's studying paralegal studies. She's learning to read contracts. She looks at me and she asks the question everyone asks eventually. Doesn't this make you like her? Adopting her, controlling her, reading her crimes every night. Doesn't that make you Eleanor? I swing. I look at the garden. I look at the window of my mother's room where Eleanor died, where Maria will sleep tonight, where another woman will sleep next month, and the month after, until the house is full of women who learn to rewrite their stories. No, I say. Eleanor adopted me to erase me. To make me grateful, to make me small, to make me believe that her theft was my gift. I adopted her to remember her. To make her see, every day, what she had done. To refuse to let her forget or to be forgotten or to be anything other than what she was. I look at Maria. I see myself at 19, hungry, exhausted, holding a law degree and $3,400 and a file of letters that started Dear Mama Eleanor. I love you. The difference is not the act, I say. The difference is the why, and the why is everything. Maria nods. She doesn't fully understand. She will someday. When she files her first petition, when she recovers her first property, when she looks at the person who stole from her and decides not to scream, not to sue, but to become something they never expected, their consequence. We swing. The oak tree moves. The garden blooms. My mother's hydrangeas, replanted from cuttings I found in a neighbor's yard, propagated from the originals Eleanor had torn out, are blue and white and perfect. And I think, this is what it means to rebuild. Not to forgive, not to forget. But to take the foundation someone else tried to sell, and to build something they never imagined. Something that outlasts them. Something that holds the next woman and the next, until the word mother means what it should have meant all along. If you're listening to this and someone used a legal word to steal from you, adoption, guardianship, trust, family, I want you to know, the paper is not the person. The signature is not the soul. And the woman who learns the language of her own oppression can become fluent in her own liberation. You are not the property. You are not the inheritance. You are not the grateful child in the photograph. You are the architect. You are the attorney. You are the one who rewrites the contract. See you in the next story.